The Muqaddimah Chapter 4 Part 2. 12. Prices in towns. It should be known that all markets cater to the needs of people. Some of these needs are necessities, foodstuffs, for instance, such as wheat and barley, 111 corresponding foods, such as beans, chickpeas, peas, and other edible grains, and wholesome foods such as onions, garlic, and the like. Other things are conveniences or luxuries, such as seasonings, fruits, clothes, utensils, mounts, all the crafts, and buildings. When a city is highly developed and has many inhabitants, the prices of necessary foodstuffs and corresponding items are low, and the prices for luxuries, such as seasonings, fruits, and the things that go with them, are high. When the inhabitants of a city are few and its civilization weak, the opposite is the case. The reason for this is that the different kinds of grains belong among the necessary foodstuffs. The demand for them, therefore, is very large. Nobody would neglect to provide for his own food or that of his establishment for a month or a year. Thus, the procurement of grain concerns the entire population of a city, or the largest part of them, both in the city itself and in its environs. This is inevitable. Everybody who procures food for himself has a great surplus beyond his own and his family's needs. This surplus is able to satisfy the needs of many of the inhabitants of that particular city. No doubt, then, the inhabitants of a city have more food than they need. Consequently, the price of food is low, as a rule, except when misfortunes occur due to celestial conditions that may affect the supply of food in certain years. If people did not have to store food against such possible mishaps, it could be given away entirely gratis, since it would be plentiful because of the large population of the city. All other conveniences, such as seasonings, fruits, and whatever else belongs to them, are not matters of general concern. Their procurement does not engage the labor of all the inhabitants of a city or the largest part of them. Then, 112 When a city has a highly developed, abundant civilization and is full of luxuries, there is a very large demand for those conveniences and for having as many of them as a person can expect in view of his situation. This results in a very great shortage of such things. Many will bid for them, but they will be in short supply. They will be needed for many purposes, and prosperous people used to luxuries will pay exorbitant prices for them, because they need them more than others. Thus, as one can see, prices come to be high. Crafts and labor also are expensive in cities with an abundant civilization. There are 3 reasons for this. First, there is much need of them, because of the place luxury occupies in the city on account of the city's large civilization. Second, industrial workers place a high value on their services and employment, for they do not have to work, since life is easy in a town because of the abundance of food there. Third, the number of people with money to waste is great, and these people have many needs for which they have to employ the services of others and have to use many workers and their skills. Therefore, they pay more for the services of workers than their labor is, ordinarily considered, worth, because there is competition for their services, and the wish to have exclusive use of them. Thus, workers, craftsmen, and professional people become arrogant, their labor becomes expensive, and the expenditures of the inhabitants of the city for these things increase. Foodstuffs in small cities that have few inhabitants are few, because these cities have a small supply of labor and because, in view of the small size of the city, the people fear food shortages. Therefore, they hold on to the food that comes into their hands and store it. It thus becomes something precious to them, and those who want to buy it have to pay higher prices. On the other hand, they also have no demand for conveniences, because the inhabitants are few and their condition is weak. Little business is done by them, and the prices there consequently, become particularly low. Customs duties and other duties that are levied on foods, in the markets and at the city gates on behalf of the ruler, and that tax collectors levy on profits from business transactions in their own interest, enter into the price of foodstuffs. Prices in cities, thus, are higher than prices in the desert, because customs duties and other duties and levies are few or non-existent among the Bedouins, while the opposite is the case in cities, especially in the later years of a dynasty 113. The cost of agricultural labor also enters into the price of foodstuffs. It is reflected in these prices 114. This has happened in Spain at the present time. The Christians pushed the Muslims back to the seacoast and the rugged territory there, where the soil is poor for the cultivation of grain and little suited for the growth of vegetables. They themselves took possession of the fine soil and the good land. Thus, the Muslims had to treat the fields and tracts of land, in order to improve the plants and agriculture there. This treatment required expensive labor, products, and materials, such as fertilizer and other things that had to be procured. Thus, their agricultural activities required considerable expenditures. They calculated these expenditures in fixing their prices, and thus Spain has become an especially expensive region, ever since the Christians forced the Muslims to withdraw to the Muslim-held coastal regions, for the reason mentioned. When they hear about the high prices in Spain, people think that they are caused by the small amount of foodstuffs and grain in the country. This is not so. As we know, the people of Spain, of all civilized people, are the ones most devoted to agriculture. It rarely happens among them that a man in authority or an ordinary person has no tract of land or field, or does not do some farming. The only exceptions are a few craftsmen and professional people, or fighters in the Holy War who are newcomers to the country. The ruler, therefore, includes in the allowances these men receive, rations consisting of the grain they need, for food and for fodder. The reason for the high prices in Spain, of the various kinds of grain is the one we have stated. The Berber countries are in the contrary position. Their fields are fine and their soil is good. Therefore, they did not have to procure anything from outside, in order to be able to cultivate agriculture, which is widely and generally practiced there. This is the reason for the cheapness of foodstuffs in their country. God determines night and day 115. 13. Bedouins are unable to settle in a city with a large civilization, population. The reason for this is that luxury increases in a city with a large civilization, as we have stated before. The needs of the inhabitants increase on account of the luxury. Because of the demand for luxury articles, they become customary, and thus come to be necessities. In addition, all labor becomes precious in the city, and the conveniences become expensive, because there are many purposes for which they are in demand in view of the prevailing luxury and because the government makes levies on market and business transactions. This is reflected in the sales prices. Conveniences, foodstuffs, and labor thus become very expensive. As a result, the expenditures of the inhabitants increase tremendously in proportion to the civilization of the city. A great deal of money is spent. Under these circumstances, people need a great deal of money for expenditures, to procure the necessities of life for themselves and their families, as well as all their other requirements. The income of the Bedouins, on the other hand, is not large, because they live where there is little demand for labor, and labor is the cause of profit. Bedouins, therefore, do not accumulate any profit or property. For this reason, it is difficult for them to settle in a big city, because conveniences there are many, 116, and things to buy are dear. In the desert, the Bedouins can satisfy their needs with a minimum of labor, because in their lives they are little used to luxuries and all their requirements. They are not, therefore, obliged to have property. Every Bedouin who is attracted to city life quickly shows himself unable to compete, and is disgraced. The only exceptions are such Bedouins as have previously accumulated property and obtained more of it than they needed and therefore achieved the amount of tranquility and luxury that is natural to civilized people. They, then, may move to a city, and their condition, as regards customs and luxury, can blend with that of its inhabitants. This is the way the civilization of cities begins. God comprises everything. 117. 14. Differences with regard to prosperity and poverty are the same in countries as in cities. It should be known that the condition of the inhabitants in regions that have an abundant civilization and contain numerous nations and many inhabitants is favorable. They have much property and many cities. Their dynasties and realms are large. The reason for all this is the aforementioned great amount of available labor and the fact, which we shall mention later on, that it brings wealth. A great surplus of products remains after the necessities of the inhabitants have been satisfied. This surplus provides for a population far beyond the size and extent of the actual one, and comes back to the people as profit that they can accumulate, as we shall mention in the chapter on the ways of making a living and the explanation of sustenance and profit. 118. Prosperity, thus, increases, and conditions become favorable. There is luxury and wealth. The tax revenues of the ruling dynasty increase on account of business prosperity. Its property increases, and its authority grows. It comes to use fortresses and castles, to found towns, and to construct cities. This 119 may be exemplified by the eastern regions, such as Egypt, Syria, the non-Arab Iraq, India, China, and the whole northern region, beyond the Mediterranean. When their civilization increased, the property of the inhabitants increased, and their dynasties became great. Their towns and settlements became numerous, and their commerce and conditions improved. At this time, we can observe the condition of the merchants of the Christian nations who come to the Muslims in the Maghrib. Their prosperity and affluence cannot be fully described because it is so great. The same applies to the merchants from the East and what we hear about their conditions, and even more so to the Far Eastern merchants from the countries of the non-Arab Iraq, India, and China. We hear remarkable stories reported by travelers about their wealth and prosperity. These stories are usually received with skepticism. The common people who hear them think that the prosperity of these peoples is the result of the greater amount of property owned by them, 120, or of the existence of gold and silver mines in their country in larger number than elsewhere, or of the fact that they, to the exclusion of others, appropriated the gold of the ancient nations. This is not so. The only gold mine about whose existence in these regions we have information, lies in the Sudan country, which is nearer to the Maghrib than to any other country. Furthermore, all the merchandise that is in their country is exported by them for commerce. If they possessed ready property in abundance, they would not export their merchandise in search of money, and they would have altogether no need of other people's property. Astrologers have noticed this and been amazed by the favorable conditions and abundance of property in the East. They came and said that the gifts of the stars and the shares of good fortune were larger in the nativities of the East than in the nativities of the West. This is correct from the point of view of the correspondence between astrological judgments and terrestrial conditions, as we have stated 121, but astrologers give us only the astrological reason. They ought also to give us the terrestrial reason. The terrestrial reason is the large extent and concentration of civilization in the eastern regions, as we have mentioned. A large civilization yields large profits because of the large amount of available labor, which is the cause of profit. Therefore, the East enjoys more prosperity than all other regions. This is not exclusively the result of the influence of the stars. Our previous indications have made it clear that the influence of the stars cannot produce such a result all by itself. The existence of a Correspondence between astrological judgments and terrestrial civilization and nature is something inevitable. The relationship between prosperity and civilization may be exemplified by the regions of Afriqiya and Barca. When their population decreased and their civilization shrank, the condition of their inhabitants decayed. They became poor and indigent. The tax revenues from the region decreased. The property of the dynasties that ruled there became small. Formerly, the Shia, Fatimid, and Sinhaja, Zirid, dynasties had enjoyed a well-known prosperity and large tax revenues. They had been able to spend a great deal and pay large allowances. This went so far that, most of the time, money was brought from Al-Qayrawan to the ruler of Egypt for his needs and important business. The property of the dynasty was so extensive that Jahar al-Khatib carried with him, on his expedition to conquer Egypt, 1,000 loads of money from which he paid the salaries and allowances of the soldiers and the expenditures of the raiders. 122. The region of the Maghrib was inferior to Afriqiya in ancient times. Still, it had no little wealth. During the Almohad dynasty, its condition was favorable and its revenues abundant. At this time, the Maghrib has gone down in this respect because of the decrease and shrinkage of civilization there. Most of the Berber civilization, population, there is gone, and has obviously and palpably become inferior to what it used to be. Its condition has almost become similar to that of Afriqiya. Formerly, its civilization had extended from the Mediterranean to the Sudan country between the longitude S of Sus in the far west 123, in Morocco, and Barca. Today, all or most of it is a waste, empty, and desert area, except for the coastal regions or the hills near it. God inherits the earth and whomever is upon it. He is the best heir. 15. The accumulation of estates and farms in cities. 124. Their uses and yields. At 125 should be known that the accumulation of numerous estates and farms by the inhabitants of towns and cities does not come all at once and not at one time. No one person would have enough wealth to acquire limitless, real, property. 126. Even if prosperity were as great as possible, the acquisition and accumulation of real property would be gradual. It may come about through inheritance from one's forefathers and blood relatives, so that eventually the property of many comes to one person, who thus possesses much. Or it may be through fluctuation in the real estate market. When one dynasty ends and another begins, the militia vanishes. There is no protection, and the city collapses and is ruined. At that time, the possession of real estate does not make a person happy, because it is of little use in the general upheaval. Real estate values fall, and real estate can be acquired for low prices. It then passes through inheritance into the possession of someone else. By that time, the city has regained its youthful vigor as the new dynasty flourishes, and conditions in it are in excellent shape. The result is that one may be happy with the possession of estates and farms, because they will then be very useful. Their value increases, and they assume an importance they did not have before. This is the meaning of fluctuation in the real estate market. The owner of real estate now turns out to be one of the wealthiest men in the city. That is not the result of his own effort and business activity, because he would be unable to achieve such a thing by himself. Estates and farms do not yield their owner a sufficient income for his needs. The income from them will not pay for the customs of luxury and the things that go with it. As a rule, it serves only to help provide for the necessities of life. We have heard from scholars that the motive in the acquisition of estates and farms is a concern for the helpless children a person may leave behind. Income from the real estate is to serve the purpose of providing for their education, care, and upbringing, as long as they are unable to earn their own living. When they are able to earn their own living, they will do it by themselves. But, there often are children who are unable to earn their own living because of some weakness of the body or some defect in the part of the mind that provides the ability to make a living. The real property then becomes their support. This is the motive of persons who spend a great deal of money acquiring real estate. The motive is not to accumulate capital through such acquisitions, or to provide for extravagant living. This is achieved only by a few and is achieved only rarely through market fluctuations, through the acquisition of a great deal of real estate, and through the upgrading of real estate as such and its value in a certain city. But then, if someone achieves it, the eyes of emirs and governors are directed to him and his real estate. As a rule, they take it away, or they urge him to sell it to them. Such real estate spells harm and hardship to its owners. God has the power to execute his commands. 127. 16 capitalists among the inhabitants of cities need rank and protection. This is because a sedentary person who has a great deal of capital and has acquired a great number of estates and farms and become one of the wealthiest inhabitants of a particular city, who is looked upon as such and lives in great luxury and is accustomed to luxury, competes in this respect with emirs and rulers. The latter become jealous of him. The aggressiveness that is natural to human beings makes them cast their eyes upon his possessions. They envy him them and try every possible trick to catch him in the net of a government decision and to find an obvious reason for punishing him, so as to confiscate his property. Government decisions are as a rule unjust, because pure justice is found only in the legal caliphate that lasted only a short while. Muhammad said, "The caliphate after me will last 30 years, then, it will revert to being tyrannical royal authority." 128 Therefore, the owner of property and conspicuous wealth in a given civilization, community, needs a protective force to defend him, as well as a rank 128A on which he may rely. This purpose may be met by a person related to the ruler, or a close friend of the ruler, or a group feeling that the ruler will respect. 129 In its shade, he may rest and live peacefully, safe from hostile attacks. If he does not have that, he will find himself robbed by all kinds of tricks and legal pretexts. God decides, and no one can change his decision. 130. 17 Sedentary culture in cities comes from the dynasties. It is firmly rooted when the dynasty is continuous and firmly rooted. The reason for this is that sedentary culture is a condition that is the result of custom and goes beyond the necessary conditions of civilization. How far beyond, differs in accordance with unlimited differences in the prosperity and the numerical strength or weakness of the nations. Sedentary culture, 131 occurs in the nations, when much diversity develops among its various subdivisions. It is thus on the same level as the crafts. Each particular kind of craft needs persons to be in charge of it and skilled in it. The more numerous the various subdivisions of a craft are, the larger the number of the people who have to practice that craft. The particular group practicing that craft is colored by it. As the days follow one upon the other, and one professional coloring comes after the other, the craftsmen become experienced in their various crafts and skilled in the knowledge of them. Long periods of time experiences, add to establishing the crafts and to causing them to be firmly rooted. This 132 happens mostly in cities, because cities have a highly developed civilization and their inhabitants are very prosperous, and the dynasty is at the root of it. Because the dynasty collects the property of the subjects and spends it on its inner circle and on the men connected with it who are more influential by reason of their position than by reason of their property. The money comes from the subjects and is spent among the people of the dynasty and then among those inhabitants of the city who are connected with them. They are the largest part of the population. Their wealth, therefore, increases and their riches grow. The customs and ways of luxury multiply, and all the various kinds of crafts are firmly established among them. This, then, is sedentary culture. Therefore, cities in remote parts of the realm, even if they have an abundant civilization, are found to be predominantly Bedouin and remote from sedentary culture in all their ways. This is in contrast with the situation in towns that lie in the middle, the center and seat of the dynasty. The only reason is that the government is near them and pours its money into them, like the water of a river that makes green everything around it, and fertilizes the soil adjacent to it, while in the distance everything remains dry. We have stated before that dynasty and government are the world's marketplace. 133 All kinds of merchandise are found in the market and near it. Far from the market, however, goods are altogether non-existent. As a particular dynasty continues to rule and its rulers succeed each other in a particular city, sedentary culture becomes increasingly firmly established and rooted among the inhabitants of that city. This may be exemplified by the Jews. Their rule in Syria lasted about 1,400 years. Sedentary culture thus became firmly established among them. They became skilled in the customary ways and means of making a living and in the manifold crafts belonging to it as regards food, clothing, and all the other parts of domestic economy, so much so that these things, as a rule, can still be learned from them to this day. Sedentary culture and its customs became firmly rooted in Syria through them and, through, the Roman dynasties which succeeded them for 600 years. Thus, they had the most developed sedentary culture possible. The same was the case with the Copts. Their political power lasted 3,000 years. The customs of sedentary culture were thus firmly rooted in their country, Egypt. They were succeeded there by the Greeks and the Romans, and then by Islam, which abrogated everything. The customs of sedentary culture have, thus, always continued in Egypt. The customs of sedentary culture became likewise firmly rooted in the Yemen, because the Arabs ruled continuously in the Yemen for thousands of years, ever since the time of the Amalekites and the Tubas, who were succeeded by the rule of the Madar. The same was the case with the sedentary culture in the Iraq, which, for thousands of years, was ruled continuously by the Nabateans and the Persians, that is, the Chaldeans, the Chionids, the Achaemenids, the Sasanians, Al-Kisra'iyah, and, after them, the Arabs. Down to this time there has never been upon the face of the earth a people with more sedentary culture than the inhabitants of Syria, the Iraq, and Egypt. The 134 customs of sedentary culture also became firmly rooted in Spain, which, for thousands of years, was ruled continuously by the great Gothic dynasty, later succeeded by the Umayyad realm. Both dynasties were great. Therefore, the customs of sedentary culture continued and became firmly established in Spain. Ifriqiya and the Maghrib had no great royal authority before Islam. They, Romans, Byzantines, Rum, 135 and European Christians had crossed the sea to Ifriqiya and had taken possession of the coast. The obedience the Berbers who lived there paid them was not firmly grounded. They were there only temporarily. No dynasty was close to the people of the Maghrib. From time to time, they offered their obedience to the Goths across the sea. When God brought Islam and the Arabs took possession of Ifriqiya and the Maghrib, the Arab rule lasted for only a short while at the beginning of Islam. At that time, the Arabs were in the stage of Bedouin life. Those who stayed in Ifriqiya and the Maghrib did not find there any old tradition of sedentary culture, because the original population of Ifriqiya and the Maghrib had been Berbers immersed in Bedouin life. Very soon, the Berbers of Morocco revolted under Maysara al-Motgari in the days of Hisham b. Abd al-Malik, 136, and never again later reverted to Arab rule. They were independent. If they rendered the oath of allegiance to Idris, his rule over them cannot be considered an Arab rule, because the Berbers were in charge of it, and there were not many Arabs in it. Ifriqiya remained in the possession of the Aqlabids and the Arabs who were with them. They had some sedentary culture as the result of the luxury and prosperity of the royal authority and the large civilization of Al-Qayrawan that were theirs. The Qudama and then the Sinhaja after them inherited it from the Aqlabids. But all that was brief and lasted less than 400 years. Their dynasty ended, and the coloring of sedentary culture, that existed there, changed, as it had not been firmly established. The Hilal, who were Arab Bedouins, gained power over the country and ruined it. Some obscure traces of sedentary culture have remained there down to the present time. They can be noticed among those who had ancestors in Al-Qala, 137 Al-Qayrawan, or Al-Madiyat. Some traces of sedentary culture can be found in the domestic economy and the customs of these people. They are mixed with other things, but the person who comes from a sedentary environment and knows about sedentary culture can discern them. That is the case with most cities in Afriqiya, but not in the Maghrib and the cities there, because since the time of the Aqlabids, the Shia, Fatimids, and the Sinhaja, the ruling dynasty in Afriqiya has been firmly rooted there for a longer period than the dynasties in the Maghrib. The Maghrib, on the other hand, has received a good deal of sedentary culture from Spain since the dynasty of the Almohads, and the customs of sedentary culture became established there through the control that the ruling dynasty of the Maghrib exercised over Spain. A good many of the inhabitants of Spain went to the Almohads in the Maghrib, voluntarily or involuntarily. One knows how far-flung the influence of the Almohad dynasty was. It possessed a good deal of firmly established sedentary culture, most of it due to the inhabitants of Spain. Later on, the inhabitants of eastern Spain were expelled by the Christians and moved to Afriqiya 138 in the cities there. They left traces of sedentary culture. Most of it is in Tunis, where it mixed with the sedentary culture of Egypt and Egyptian customs imported by travelers. Thus, the Maghrib and Afriqiya had a good deal of sedentary culture. But emptiness took its place, and it disappeared. The Berbers in the Maghrib reverted to their Bedouin ways and Bedouin toughness. But, at any rate, the traces of sedentary culture are more numerous in Afriqiya than in the Maghrib and in the cities of the Maghrib. The old dynasties had lasted longer in Afriqiya than in the Maghrib, and the customs of the people of Afriqiya had been close to the customs of the Egyptians because of the great amount of intercourse between the Egyptians and the people of Afriqiya. This secret should be understood, because it is not known to the people. It should be known that these are related matters: the strength and weakness of a dynasty, the numerical strength of a nation or race, the size of a town or city, and the amount of prosperity and wealth. This is because dynasty and royal authority constitute the form of the world and of civilization, which, in turn, together with the subjects, cities, and all other things, constitute the matter of dynasty and royal authority. 139 The tax money reverts to the people. Their wealth, as a rule, comes from their business and commercial activities. If the ruler pours out gifts and money upon his people, it spreads among them and reverts to him, and again from him to them. It comes from them through taxation and the land tax, and reverts to them through gifts. The wealth of the subjects corresponds to the finances of the dynasty. The finances of the dynasty, in turn, correspond to the wealth and number of the subjects. The origin of it all is civilization and its extensiveness. If this is considered and examined in connection with the various dynasties, it will be found to be so. God decides, and no one can change his decision. 140. 18. Sedentary culture is the goal of civilization. It means the end of its lifespan and brings about its corruption. We have explained before 141 that royal authority and the foundation of dynasties are the goal of group feeling, and that sedentary culture is the goal of Bedouin life, and that any civilization, be it a Bedouin civilization or sedentary culture, whether it concerns ruler or commoner. 142 has a physical 143 life, just as any individual created being has a physical life. Reason and tradition make it clear that the age of 40 years means the end of the increase of an individual's powers and growth. When a man has reached the age of 40, nature stops growing for a while, then starts to decline. It should be known that the same is the case with sedentary culture in civilization, because there is a limit that cannot be overstepped. When luxury and prosperity come to civilized people, it naturally causes them to follow the ways of sedentary culture and adopt its customs. As one knows, sedentary culture is the adoption of diversified luxuries, the cultivation of the things that go with them. An addiction to the crafts that give elegance to all the various kinds of luxury, such as the crafts of cooking, dressmaking, building, and making carpets, vessels, and all other parts of domestic economy. For the elegant execution of all these things, there exist many crafts not needed in desert life with its lack of elegance. When elegance in domestic economy has reached the limit, it is followed by subservience to desires. From all these customs, the human soul receives a multiple coloring that undermines its religion and worldly well-being. It cannot preserve its religion, because it has now been firmly colored by customs of luxury, and it is difficult to discard such coloring. It cannot preserve its worldly well-being, because the customs of luxury demand a great many things and entail many requirements for which a man's income is not sufficient. This 144 is explained by the fact that the expenditures of the inhabitants of a city mount with the diversification of sedentary culture. Sedentary culture differs according to the differences in civilization. When a civilization grows, sedentary culture becomes more perfect. We have stated before 145 that a city with a large civilization, population, is characterized by high prices in business and high prices for its needs. The prices are then raised still higher through customs duties, for sedentary culture reaches perfection at the time when the dynasty has reached its greatest flourishing, and that is the time when the dynasty levies customs duties because then it has large expenditures. As has been stated before. 146 The 147 customs duties raise the sales prices, because small businessmen and merchants include all their expenses, even their personal requirements, in the price of their stock and merchandise. Thus, customs duties enter into the sales price. The expenditures of sedentary people, therefore, grow and are no longer reasonable but extravagant. The people cannot escape this development, because they are dominated by and subservient to their customs. All their profits go into their expenditures. One person after another becomes reduced in circumstances and indigent. Poverty takes hold of them. Few persons bid for the available goods. Business decreases, and the situation of the town deteriorates. All this is caused by excessive sedentary culture and luxury. They corrupt the city generally in respect to business and civilization. Corruption of the individual inhabitants is the result of painful and trying efforts to satisfy the needs caused by their luxury customs, the result of the bad qualities they have acquired in the process of obtaining those needs, and of the damage the soul suffers after it has obtained them. Through acquiring, still, another, bad luxury, quality 148 immorality, wrongdoing, insincerity, and trickery, for the purposes of making a living in a proper or an improper manner, increase among them. The soul comes to think about making a living, to study it, and to use all possible trickery for the purpose. People are now devoted to lying, gambling, cheating, fraud, theft, perjury, and usury. Because of the many desires and pleasures resulting from luxury, they are found to know everything about the ways and means of immorality. They talk openly about it and its causes, and give up all restraint in discussing it, even among relatives and close female relations. Where the Bedouin attitude requires modesty, and avoidance of obscenities. They also know everything about fraud and deceit, which they employ to defend themselves against the possible use of force against them and against the punishment expected for their evil deeds. Eventually, this becomes a custom and trait of character with most of them, except those whom God protects. The city, then, teems with low people of blameworthy character. They encounter competition from many members of the younger generation of the dynasty, whose education has been neglected and whom the dynasty has neglected to accept. They, therefore, adopt the qualities of their environment and company. 149 Even though they may be people of noble descent and ancestry, men are human beings and as such resemble one another. They differ in merit and are distinguished by their character, by their acquisition of virtues and avoidance of vices. The person who is strongly colored by any kind of vice and whose good character is corrupted, is not helped by his good descent and fine origin. Thus, one finds that many descendants of great families, men of a highly esteemed origin, members of the dynasty, get into deep water and adopt low occupations in order to make a living, because their character is corrupt and they are colored by wrongdoing and insincerity. If this situation spreads in a town or nation, God permits it to be ruined and destroyed. This is the meaning of the word of God. When we want to destroy a village, we order those of its inhabitants who live in luxury to act wickedly therein. Thus, the word becomes true for it, and we do destroy it. 150. A possible explanation of this situation is that the prophets, the people, do not pay for their needs, because of the great number of luxury customs and the desire of the soul to satisfy them. Thus, the affairs of the people are in disorder, and if the affairs of individuals one by one deteriorate, the town becomes disorganized and falls into ruins. This is the meaning of the statement by certain knowing people, 151, that if orange trees are much grown in a town, the town invites its own ruin. Many common people avoided the growing of orange trees around their houses on account of this ominous statement. 152 But this is not what is meant, nor is it meant that orange trees are a bad omen. 153, and cause the ruin of a city. What is meant is that gardens and irrigation are the results of sedentary culture. Orange trees, lime trees, cypresses, and similar plants having no edible fruits 154 and being of no use, are the ultimate in sedentary culture, since they are planted in gardens only for the sake of their appearance, and they are planted only after the ways of luxury have become diversified. Now, this is the stage in which one must fear the destruction and ruin of a city, as we have stated. The same has been said with regard to oleander, which is in the same category. Its only purpose is to give color to gardens with its red and white flowers. That is a luxury. Among the things that corrupt sedentary culture, there is the disposition toward pleasures and indulgence in them, because of the great luxury that prevails. It leads to diversification of the desires of the belly for pleasurable food and drink. 155 This is followed by diversification of the pleasures of sex through various ways of sexual intercourse, such as adultery and homosexuality. This leads to destruction of the human species. It may come about indirectly, through the confusion concerning one's descent caused by adultery. Nobody knows his own son, since he is illegitimate and since the sperm of different men got mixed up in the womb. 156 The natural compassion a man feels for his children and his feeling of responsibility for them is lost. Thus, they perish, and this leads to the end of the human species. Or, the destruction of the human species may come about directly, as is the case with homosexuality, which leads directly to the non-existence of offspring. It contributes more to the destruction of the human species than adultery, since it leads to the result that no human beings are brought into existence, while adultery only leads to the social non-existence of those who are in existence. Therefore, the school of Malik 157 is more explicit and correct with regard to homosexuality than the other schools. This shows that it understands the intentions of the religious law and their bearing upon the public interest better than the other legal schools. This should be understood. It shows that the goal of civilization is sedentary culture and luxury. When civilization reaches that goal, it turns toward corruption and starts being senile, as happens in the natural life of living beings. Indeed, we may say that the qualities of character resulting from sedentary culture and luxury are identical with corruption. Man is a man only inasmuch as he is able to procure for himself useful things and to repel harmful things, and inasmuch as his character is suited to making efforts to this effect. The sedentary person cannot take care of his needs personally. He may be too weak, because of the tranquility he enjoys. Or he may be too proud, because he was brought up in prosperity and luxury. Both things are blameworthy. He also is not able to repel harmful things, 158 because he has no courage as the result of his life in luxury and his upbringing under the tyrannical impact of education and instruction. 159 He thus becomes dependent upon a protective force to defend him. He then usually becomes corrupt with regard to his religion, also. They, luxury, customs and his subservience to them have corrupted him, and his soul has been colored by luxury habits. 160 As we have stated, there are only very rare exceptions. When the strength of a man and then 161 his character and religion are corrupted, his humanity is corrupted, and he becomes, in effect, transformed into an animal. It is in this sense that those government soldiers who are close to Bedouin life and Bedouin toughness are more useful than those who have grown up in a sedentary culture and have adopted the character qualities of sedentary culture. This can be found to be the case in every dynasty. It has thus become clear that the stage of sedentary culture is the stopping point in the life of civilization and dynasties. God is one and powerful. 162. 19. Cities that are the seats of royal authority fall into ruins when the ruling dynasty falls into ruins and crumbles. 163. We have found out with regard to civilization that, when a dynasty disintegrates and crumbles, the civilization of the city that is the seat of the ruler of that dynasty also crumbles, and in this process often suffers complete ruin. There hardly ever is any delay. The reasons for it are several. First, at the beginning of the dynasty, its necessary Bedouin outlook requires it not to take away people's property and to eschew too great cleverness. 164 This causes the taxes and imposts, which provide the dynasty with its substance, to be kept low. The expenditures are small, and there is little luxury. When a city that had been a royal capital comes into the possession of a new dynasty that knows little of luxury, luxury decreases among the inhabitants of that city controlled by it, because the subjects follow the dynasty. They revert to the character of the dynasty, either voluntarily, because it is human nature to follow the tradition of their masters, or involuntarily, because the character of the dynasty calls for abstention from luxury in all situations and allows little profit. Which is what constitutes the material for the formation of luxury customs. As a result, the sedentary culture of the city decreases, and many luxury customs disappear from it. That is what we mean when we speak about the ruin of a city. Second, royal authority and power are obtained by a dynasty only through superiority, which comes only after hostilities and wars. Hostility requires incompatibility between the people of the two dynasties and mutual disapproval. 165 With regard to luxury, customs and conditions, the victory of one of the two rivals causes the disappearance of the other. Thus, the conditions of the previous dynasty, especially the conditions of luxury, are disapproved of and considered detestable and evil by the people of the new dynasty. They disappear among them, because the new dynasty disapproves of them. Eventually, however, new luxury customs gradually originate among them. They produce a new sedentary culture. The period in between sees a dwindling and decrease of the first sedentary culture. This is what is meant by disintegration of civilization in a city. Third, each nation must have a home, a place, where it grows up and from which the realm took its origin. When its members take possession of another home, 166, the latter is ranked second to the first home, and the latter's cities are ranked second to the cities of the first. When the realm expands and its influence grows, it is inevitable that the seat of government be amidst the provinces belonging to the dynasty, because it is a sort of center for the whole area. Thus, the new seat of government is remote from the site of the former seat of government. The hearts of the people are attracted to the new seat of government, because the dynasty and government are there. Civilization, the population, moves there and disappears slowly from the city that was the former seat of government. Sedentary culture depends upon an abundant civilization, population, as we have said before 167, with the transfer of the population, the sedentary and urban culture, of the former seat of government, decreases. This is what is meant by its disintegration. This happened to the Seljuks when they moved their seat of government from Baghdad to Isfahan, to the Arabs before them when they moved from Al-Mada into Al-Kufa and Al-Basra, to the Abbasids when they moved from Damascus to Baghdad, and to the Marianides in the Maghrib when they moved from Marrakesh to Fez. In general, when a dynasty chooses a city for its seat of government, it causes disintegration of the civilization in the former seat of government. Fourth, when the new dynasty achieves superiority over the previous dynasty, it must attempt to transfer the people and partisans of the previous dynasty to another region where it can be sure that it will not be secretly attacked by them. Most of the inhabitants of a capital city are partisans of the ruling dynasty. They belong either to the militia who settled there at the beginning of the dynasty, or they are the dignitaries of the city. All their various classes and types have, as a rule, some contact with the dynasty. Most of them have grown up in the dynasty and are partisans of it. Even though they may not be connected with the dynasty through power and group feelings, they are connected with it through inclination, love, and faith. It is the nature of a new dynasty to wipe out all the traces of the previous dynasty. Therefore, it transfers the population from the capital city of the old dynasty to its own home, which is firmly in its possession. Some are brought there as exiles and prisoners, others as honored and well-treated guests, so that no antagonism can arise. Eventually, the capital city of the previous dynasty holds only salesmen, itinerant farm workers, hoodlums, and the great mass of common people. The place of the transferred population is taken by the militia and partisans of the new dynasty. They will be sufficient to fill the city. When the various classes of dignitaries have left the city, its inhabitants decrease. This is what is meant by disintegration of the civilization of the capital city. Then, the former capital city must produce a new civilization under the shadow of the new dynasty. Another sedentary culture corresponding to the importance of the dynasty arises in it. This may be compared to a person who has a house the interior of which is dilapidated. Most of the installations and conveniences of the rooms do not agree with his plans. He has the power to change these installations and to rebuild them according to his wishes and plans. Thus, he will tear down the house and build it up again. 168 Much the same sort of thing happens in cities that once were seats of government. We have personally seen it and know it. God determines night and day. 169. In 170 some, the primary natural reason for this situation is the fact that dynasty and royal authority have the same relationship to civilization as form has to matter. 171. The form is the shape that preserves the existence of matter through the particular kind of phenomenon it represents. It has been established in philosophy that the one cannot be separated from the other. One cannot imagine a dynasty without civilization, while a civilization without dynasty and royal authority is impossible, because human beings must by nature cooperate. 172 And that calls for a restraining influence. Political leadership, based either on religious or royal authority, is obligatory as such a restraining influence. This is what is meant by dynasty. Since the two cannot be separated, the disintegration of one of them must influence the other, just as its non-existence would entail the non-existence of the other. A great disintegration results only from the disintegration of the entire dynasty. This happened to the dynasties of the Persians, the Byzantines, and the Arabs, that is, the Arabs, in general, as well as the Umayyads and the Abbasids. An individual reign, such as those of Anushirwan, Heraclius, Abd al-Malik b. Marwan, or Ar-Rashid, cannot exercise a sweeping disintegrating influence. Individuals follow upon each other and take over the existing civilization. They preserve its existence and duration, and they are very similar to each other. The real dynasty, the one that acts upon the matter of civilization, belongs to group feeling and power. These remain with the individual members of the dynasty. But when the group feeling is lost and replaced by another group feeling that influences the existing civilization, and when all powerful members of the dynasty are wiped out, a great disintegration sets in, as we have established. God has power to do what He wishes. If He wants them to disappear, He causes them to do so, and brings forth a new creation. That is not difficult for God. 173. 20. Certain cities have crafts that others lack. This is because it is clear that the activities of the inhabitants of a city necessitate each other, since mutual cooperation is innate in civilization. The necessary activities are restricted to certain inhabitants of the city. They are in charge of them and become experts in the craft belonging to them. These activities become their particular job. They make their living through them and derive their sustenance from them, because these activities of theirs are matters of general concern in the city and generally needed. On the other hand, activities not required in a city are not regarded, since there is no profit in them for those who occupy themselves with them. The activities required for the necessities of life, such as those of tailors, smiths, carpenters, and similar occupations, exist in every city. But activities required for luxury customs and conditions exist only in cities of a highly developed culture, that have taken to luxury customs and sedentary culture. Among such activities are those of glass blowers, goldsmiths, perfumers, cooks, coppersmiths, biscuit bakers, harissa bakers, 174 weavers of brocade, and the like. These activities exist in different degrees. In accordance with increase in the customs of sedentary culture and the requirements of luxury conditions, there originate crafts, especially for this kind of luxury requirements. The crafts of this kind will, thus, exist in a particular city, but not in others. Public baths fall into this category. They exist only in densely settled cities of a highly developed civilization as a kind of indulgence resulting from luxury and wealth. Therefore, public baths do not exist in medium-sized towns. It is true that some rulers and chiefs desire to have baths in their medium-sized cities. They construct them and put them into operation. However, since there is no demand for them from the mass of the people, they are soon neglected and fall into ruins. Those in charge of them speedily leave them, because they have little profit and income from them. God holds His hands tight together but also opens them wide. 175. 21. The existence of group feeling in cities and the superiority of some of the inhabitants over others. It 176 is clear that it is in the nature of human beings to enter into close contact and to associate with each other, even though they may not have a common descent. However, as we have mentioned before, 177 such association is weaker than one based upon common descent, and the resulting group feeling is only part of what group feeling resulting from common descent is. Many inhabitants of cities come into close contact through intermarriage. This draws them together and, eventually, they constitute individual related groups. The same friendship or hostility that is found among tribes and families, is found among them, and they split into parties and groups. When senility befalls a dynasty and its shadow recedes from the remote regions, of the realm, the inhabitants of the cities of that dynasty have to take care of their own affairs and to look after the protection of their own place. They revert to the council, government, and people of the higher class keep separated from people of the lower class. Human souls, by their very nature, are prone to seek superiority and domination. Because the air is clear of forceful government and dynasty, the elders desire to gain complete control. Everybody vies with everybody else. They try to have followers, such as clients, partisans, and allies, join them. They spend whatever they possess on the rabble and the mob. Everybody forms a group with his fellows, and one of them achieves superiority. He then turns against his equals, in order to slow them down, 178, and persecutes them with assassination or exile. Eventually, he takes away all executive power from them and renders them innocuous. 179. He obtains sole control of the entire city. He then is of the opinion that he has created a realm that he may leave to his descendants, but the same symptoms of power and senility to be found in a large realm are also to be found in his smaller realm. Some of these people occasionally aspire to the ways of the great rulers who are masters of tribes and families and group feelings, who go into combat and wage wars, and who control large regions and provinces. They adopt the custom of sitting upon a throne. They use an outfit, 180, organize cavalcades for traveling about the country, use seal rings, are greeted ceremoniously, and are addressed as sire, Mala, which is ridiculous in the eyes of all who can observe the situation for themselves. They adopt royal emblems to which they are not entitled. They were pushed into following such improper aspirations only by the dwindling influence of the ruling dynasty and the close relationships they had established, and that eventually resulted in group feeling. Some of the people, on the other hand, refrained from improper aspirations, and lived simply, because they did not want to make themselves the butt of jokes and ridicule. This happened in our own time in the later years of the Hafsid dynasty in Afriqiya to inhabitants of places in the Jirid, including Tripoli, Gabes, Tozur, Tuzar, Nafta, Gafsa, Kafsa, Biskra and the Zab, and adjacent regions. They acquired such aspirations when the shadow of the ruling dynasty had been receding from them for some decades. They seized power in their respective cities and took control of the judicial and tax administration away from the dynasty. They paid the ruling dynasty some obedience and gave it reluctant allegiance, and treated it with some politeness, kindness, and submissiveness. However, they did not mean it. They passed their position on to their descendants, who are living at this time. Among their successors, there originated that cruelty and tyranny that is common among the descendants and successors of rulers. They thought that they ranked with true rulers, despite the fact that they had only recently been common people. 181. Something similar happened also at the end of the Sinhaja dynasty. The inhabitants of the cities of the Jirid made themselves independent there and seized control of the ruling dynasty. Eventually, they were deprived of their power by the sheikh and ruler of the Almohads, Abd al-Mumin b. Ali. He transferred all of them from their emirates in the Jirid to the Maghrib, and removed all traces of them from the Jirid, as we shall mention in his history. 182. The same happened also in Ceuta at the end of the dynasty of the Banu Abdul Mumin. As a rule, such leadership goes to members of great and noble houses who are eligible for the positions of elders and leaders in a city. Sometimes, it goes to some person from the lowest class of people. He obtains group feeling and close contact with the mob for reasons that fate, al-Miqdar, produces for him. He, then, achieves superiority over the elders and people of the higher class when they have lost their own group support. God has the power to execute his commands. 183. 22. The dialects of the urban population. The dialects of the urban population follow the language of the nation or race that has control of the cities in question, or has founded them. Therefore, the dialects spoken in all Muslim cities in the east and the west at this time are Arabic. Even though the habit of the Arabic Madar language has become corrupted and its vowel endings, Irab, have changed 184. The reason for this is the fact that the Muslim dynasty gained power over foreign nations. Religion and religious organization constitute the form for existence and royal authority, which, together, constitute the matter for religion. 185 Form is prior to matter. Religion is derived from the religious law, which is in Arabic, because the Prophet was an Arab. Therefore, it is necessary to avoid using any language but Arabic in all the provinces of Islam. This may be exemplified by Umar's prohibition against using the idiom native among the non-Arabs. He said that it is kib, that is, ruse and deceit. Since the religion, Islam, avoided the non-Arab dialects, and the language of the supporters of the Muslim dynasty was Arabic, those dialects were avoided altogether in all its provinces. Because people follow the government and adopt its religion, ways. 186 Use of the Arabic language became a symbol of Islam and of obedience to the Arabs. They, foreign nations, avoided using their own dialects and languages in all the cities and provinces, and the Arabic language became their language. Eventually, Arabic became firmly rooted as the spoken language in all their cities and towns. The non-Arab languages came to seem imported and foreign there. The Arabic language became corrupt through contact with foreign languages, in some of its rules 187 and through changes of the word endings, even though it remained unchanged semantically. This type of Arabic was called the sedentary language, and was used in all the cities of Islam. Furthermore, most of the inhabitants of the cities of Islam at this time are descendants of the Arabs who were in possession of these cities and perished in their luxury. They outnumbered the non-Arabs who lived there and inherited their land and country. Now, languages are inherited. Thus, the language spoken by the descendants has remained close to that of their forefathers, even though its rules have gradually become corrupted by contact with non-Arabs. It was called sedentary with reference to the inhabitants of settled regions and cities, in contrast to the language of the desert Arabs, which is more deeply rooted in Arabism. When non-Arabs, such as the day-long